Afternoon, it is 2:30. I'm meteorologist Nicholas Raboso, and thank you for joining us here on Next Weather. Good to be with you. It's been a little while for me on Next Weather, and glad to be back. And this one is definitely a special one because it is a big weather anniversary that we are talking about. July 19th, 1997. That was a day where we were dealing with torrential rainfall here on the Gulf Coast, strong winds. This all a result of Hurricane Danny, which was a Category 1 hurricane, made landfall on this state in Baldwin County. This is the satellite picture from Hurricane Danny back in July 1997. You can see the eye there. A small storm, but a very powerful storm. Only a Category 1, but a strong reminder that a Category 1 hurricane can cause serious damage. So once again, we thank you for joining us here on Next Weather. We are live on Facebook and on YouTube as well. You can check in with the comments. If you have any Hurricane Danny stories that you would like to share, I'd love to see them in the comments. I have the comments pulled up on the side as always. So first of all, let's review the track of Hurricane Danny. What was the track like? Well, here's the big picture. So you can see the looping motion, the kind of wayward motion of this storm. It was a slow mover, and that was the key to the impacts of Hurricane Danny. Danny is a perfect lesson for impacts from a minimal hurricane, meaning a Category 1 hurricane. Impacts being very much farther than what anyone expected because of that slow motion. That wider kind of yellow color there, tan color that you see, that is when the storm was a Category 1 hurricane. Originally made landfall in Louisiana, then crossed over very slowly on a path that kept the Mobile Bay area, Baldwin County, and our Florida Panhandle counties in onshore flow for a very long time. However, not very strong because it was only tropical storm force winds with the hurricane force winds right near the center. But as the storm approached, it got worse for us here in Mobile and Baldwin counties, especially Dauphin Island recording extreme wind gusts. Similar story for places like Gulf Shores. And then you think about southern Baldwin County, the eye wall of that storm. I actually have the radar loop, which we will take a look at in a second, where you can really see where some of that strong wind was. But once again, there it is, the track of Hurricane Danny. I'm actually going to push this forward here, where we're going to zoom in and look at the slow motion. So these little dots that I have every 6 hours, and then the two markers every 12 or every 24 hours. So excuse me, the dots are every 12 hours, then every 24 hours are the markers there. 7 a.m. July 19th to 7 a.m. July 20th. That is not a long way to go in 24 hours. This is some very slow motion. It made landfall kind of near Mullet Point in Baldwin County, crossed over, say, around Weeks Bay, and then dipped slowly south, just drifting over Baldwin County before it started to turn north and gets out of here. People remember it as months of rainfall, it seemed like. It never stopped. The wind never stopped. The trees never stopped falling. All of this because of the extremely slow motion of this storm. And I'll pull this up full so you can actually see it here. Take a look at that, how little it moved over that time period, stalling over South Mobile Bay and then stalling over Baldwin County there. So once again, a memorable storm because of that slow motion. And of course, let me go back to the landfall real quick. First landfall was, I mentioned, in Louisiana near Buras on the 18th. Moved back over the Gulf, crossed south of the Mississippi Gulf Coast, weak steering currents, and then I formed as it slowly moved closer to Mobile Bay, passed near Fort Morgan on dawn, July 19th, made landfall, Mullet Point around midday as that Category 1 hurricane, then finally weakening as it turned north into Escambia County there and started to head out there. And the area of hurricane force winds there, right around that yellow line, that's some of the areas that received the worst damage, especially because of the wind, which even though it was only a Category 1 hurricane, the wind was still significant. Here's the radar loop from Hurricane Danny. and you'll see it pull up here. This thing was an extremely slow-moving storm, but it still had structure. Look around the center there, you see the eye wall developing. You can clearly see that open circle of blue water there. That's the eye. See it moving over Fort Morgan there at that point. And look at the western side of the eye wall here. Really heavy rain there. Some incredible rainfall totals. Radar estimates over Mobile Bay of around 40 inches of rain with this storm. You can see all the deep reds there over Mobile County. Of course, far eastern Mobile County had some of the highest rainfall totals, and Dauphin Island really had some of the highest rainfall totals, but also heavy rain in Baldwin County. And as the storm was over Baldwin County, you can see kind of at the end of this loop here, this is still the area where we were dealing with tropical storm to nearly hurricane force winds. This has been a day. So incredible to see how long this storm lasted. So you saw how much rainfall was there. You saw how much rainfall was there with that radar loop. Now take a look at this. This is the velocity. Typically we show velocity during what? Tornadoes, severe weather. But we also show it during hurricanes because it can get us an idea of what was happening. And I have the legend on the left side of the screen here. And you can see, so our radar site located here at KMOB at the Mobile Regional Airport, to illustrate the way the winds are going. The green is moving towards the radar, so there's the wind moving like that. The red is moving away from the radar like that. And in these bright pink colors here, we have near hurricane force winds there. And in these orange, that is definitely picking up hurricane force winds. Now you notice it gets weaker in the middle here. That is because of the orientation of the hurricane's winds in relation to the radar. It's a little bit of science to understand, a little bit of kind of mapping yourself out to understand how the radar beam interacts with the wind, but it's really cool to see the circulation here and those bright colors showing that core of hurricane force winds that sat over an area for such a long time there over Mobile and Baldwin counties. We talk about this a lot here, and if you are new to hurricanes down here on the Gulf Coast, this is always something to think about. We think about it with Hurricane Sally as well. Hurricane Danny dumping a lot of rain, around Category 1 force winds for some of us, mostly tropical storm force winds. After a certain period of time, that ground is going to get so saturated that all of your trees that have been doing fine in the tropical storm force winds suddenly are not doing fine and starting to fall over. That is, of course, because of the saturated ground. And the ground gets looser, everything gets muddy, and the trees can just fall right over. I think back to significant rainfall events where I think it's April 2014. We had a significant rainfall event, and trees were coming down not because of wind, just because of the weight of the water combined with the weak soil. So that is something that can happen, and we got significant pecan crop loss because of this, especially in Mobile and Baldwin counties, because you had hurricane force winds around 75 miles per hour. Plus, you also had the heavy rainfall saturating that soil. So here are some of the damage pictures from this incredible storm here. I'll take it full so you can see them. So this first one here, this is from Daphne. When we think about rainfall, we think about erosion. And we did have erosion that happened with Hurricane Danny. Look at that house. I actually remember looking back at news footage from us at Fox 10 here with Hurricane Danny. I remember seeing the reports near this house in particular. You can see where just the ground is coming out and the red clay being exposed there. And you can even see that porch starting to warp a little bit, that column disconnecting there. These photos, thank you to the Coastal Weather Research Center at USA for compiling some of these photos. I mentioned in the velocity image, you could see the wind direction. By the time the storm got into Mobile Bay, and especially into Baldwin County, the wind direction over Mobile Bay had changed. The wind direction over Mobile Bay was now out of Mobile Bay. It was a northerly wind that was pushing wind out of Mobile Bay. And what did this do? Well, that ended up pushing all the water out of Mobile Bay. And there you can see that. You see the sand exposed. You could walk all the way out to the end of those piers, but instead of being on them, you could be under them because the water was getting out of Mobile Bay. A lot of people tell stories of the water flowing out of the bay during Hurricane Danny. Anytime we get a strong north wind, a very strong north wind, sometimes that can happen. Damage to the sands at Romar Beach Condo. This is a pretty iconic image, or at least the memory of that side of that building getting ripped off by Category 1 winds. This was a bit of a wake-up call for some, I believe, and you can see Category 1 winds. You wouldn't think you would see that kind of structural damage, but we did. And definitely a lot of thinking done there after that. But you can see just what the Category 1 hurricane can do, especially if it's over you for such a long time. Here's another one, flooding along Fowl River in Mobile County. How many inches of rain did I mention? What, 30-something? Yeah, that's what we were pushing there. And that is what happens. And of course, you get river flooding, you get freshwater flooding in general from just the amount of rainfall. The drainage systems couldn't keep up, and you had images like that all over Mobile and Baldwin counties, I should mention, with flooding, extreme flooding, especially around those rivers. One more image here. Boats getting lifted up there thanks to water. Of course, we had water that pushed onshore briefly. So this is Dauphin Island, where we have a boat that has been lifted up there. That's something we see typically during hurricanes. Maybe you wouldn't think of that happening during a Category 1, but yes, that is possible because once again, we have to think about the impacts of a Category 1. And when a Category 1 hurricane is moving that slow, these bigger impacts can definitely happen. So here's a really wild image to look at here. This is the radar estimated rainfall totals, and you see that black area that is maxed out above 25 inches. And in fact, in the area over the bay here, that is where I was mentioning earlier, we likely had rainfall around 40 inches. Dauphin Island, the measurements above 30. So really that verified that yes, we were seeing rainfall amounts around that. That's what happened when you have that much water falling out of the atmosphere in the eye wall of a hurricane. Here are those actual rainfall totals here. These are the observations. Dauphin Island Sea Lab, 36.7 inches from the storm. 36.7 inches. 33 inches in Malbus, Gulf Shores 30, Fairhope 24 inches in Mobile Regional Airport, a measly 13 inches, but still enough to cause flooding. This was a serious storm with its slow motion even only being a Category 1. And I go back to those damaged pictures once again. I go back to those damaged pictures. Reminder that this is the kind of stuff that can happen when you have rainfall for that long. It really doesn't even take a hurricane. It could take a tropical storm. We think back to Allison. We think back to Harvey in Texas, where Harvey had become a tropical storm but dumped so much rain over Houston. It can happen here. That's a great reminder. Danny is a great reminder of what can happen, even if you have a minimal hurricanes, air quotes, minimal hurricane. Category 1 hurricane, 75 to 95 miles per hour. That's pretty much what this storm was. It was a Category 1. It says some damage there. Well, lots of damage can happen. It just depends on the exact situation. Always a good reminder to look at the specific situation of the storm there. Look at the specific situation. What is the storm motion? Where is it going? How long is it going to sit over you? What's the orientation of it to the coastline? All of those things to think about. Not just what category is it. Not just what category is the storm. That is so important to remember. All right, so we are in hurricane season. It is July 19th, of course, the anniversary of this storm. And we have a long way to go in the hurricane season. We've been lucky this month so far, which is typical. We've been a little bit quiet. We did have Beryl, though, Category 4. Of course, reminders from Beryl when it was closer and closer to Houston or the Galveston area as it was making landfall. A weaker hurricane, but still caused significant damage. That one was strengthening on landfall there. Next name on the list is Debbie. We did have Chris. It was a small tropical storm, very short-lived. Thing that's shutting everything down right now is Saharan dust. Saharan dust pretty much all over the Atlantic, and that's coming off the Saharan desert there over Africa. This plume might actually reach the Gulf Coast. You can see this is next Tuesday, Wednesday there, the 24th. You can see that plume, those kind of orange colors reaching us. You may notice some dustier skies, some hazier skies there. But that's what's shutting it down. That is dry air. Tropical systems want moist air. We get dry air with the Saharan air layer. However, I want to direct your attention to the extended tropical weather outlook. This is valid July 31st to August 6th, and this is essentially looking at possible development areas. This is put out by the Climate Prediction Center. This is their week 3 outlook, so this is far, far out there. But when we had Beryl, this outlook was somewhat accurate. It somewhat correctly predicted kind of future development areas. We knew we would have an area of favorability, and that is exactly what happened. So here we are with a couple areas. It looks like the Eastern Pacific might get active as we start August. And then, of course, we're watching the area out here, very similar to where Beryl developed. Windward Islands, Lesser Antilles, Greater Antilles, Caribbean Sea, in the western side of the main development region of the Atlantic. The main development region of the Atlantic, essentially this zone right here, where we typically see development there. So we're going to be watching that zone. I will note that the far eastern Atlantic might be becoming less favorable because of all of that dry air that is in place. We've actually seen some slight reduction of the sea surface temperature compared to average, at least, compared to average. Those sea surface temperatures are still hot, don't get me wrong there, but it's slightly lower than they have been compared to average. So maybe the western Atlantic is more favorable. But as these storms march on, we'll be watching. We'll keep our eyes out, especially as we begin August. And a reminder, as always, we have a long, long way to go in hurricane season. And we just want you to, as always, be prepared. And we will keep you prepared. We can see we're in July, and you see storm frequency. It's not a lot. But once we get to August, the storms really get going. That is typically what happens. So we will always be watching for sure. That's this edition of Next Weather. Happy to go look back at Hurricane Danny 27 years ago today, 1997, here in July, landfall July 19th. A historic storm and a great reminder as we're heading into a busy hurricane season, the peak of a busy hurricane season, that category may not matter, and impacts are the thing that matter the most. So thank you so much for joining us here on Next Weather. Once again, I am meteorologist Nicholas Urbosa. We thank you for joining us.